Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host and husband. And today, let's see, so when this episode comes out, since we always record these a few days early, let's hope that we are not currently preparing for another hurricane.
A third hurricane.
You guys, we live in Tampa Bay, Florida, and Tampa Bay has not had a direct hit from a hurricane in over 100 years until this year. And this will be our third one. So we're really excited about that.
I know. What were they saying in the radio? Like the Indian burial grounds that are been messed with?
Yeah, so there's
that's the problem.
Native American Indians that have a lot of burial grounds in our area, and we've always said that's protected. Tampa Bay is those burial grounds, but supposedly in August there was like this news story of this guy dug up the burial grounds because he wanted to put a driveway in his house, and so the rumor is that he upset the whatever was protecting us, and that's where now we're just getting slammed.
We need to find this guy and be like, dude, what are you doing? Either you need to figure this out or you got to move or something. Because, hopefully no serious hurricanes, but fingers crossed, we will see.
Yeah, so, I guess you could probably at this point, if you're listening to this episode when it came out, probably check my Instagram at Vanessa G Fitness, because I'm sure if we are in hurricane prep, I'm sure I'll be sharing about it. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. On this episode, I wanted to talk about why your weight on the scale just does not seem to be going down. Why can you just not quite get your weight where you want it to be? And the answer is probably not what you are expecting. There's could be a lot of answers to that question, but the angle I want to take on this episode is one that I see so many women making this mistake, and it keeping so many women stuck to where they never reach their weight loss goals. And that is they use the scale incorrectly.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's
really shocking.
Yeah, that's really what this comes down to, is the scale that you weigh yourself with. That's what we're talking about, a body weight scale here. It is a tool, and it is a tool that can be very effective and helpful, but it's a tool nonetheless, and it has its limitations. And I really see so many women that use it incorrectly and therefore keep themselves stuck because they're putting so much value in this form of measurement, and they're not using it correctly. So let's talk about that here. Well, here's what most women do. Again, this is kind of like the normal picture I see happening. So you have someone who, maybe they went to a doctor's appointment. Maybe they don't even own a scale at home, but they went to the doctor. They stepped on the scale and they were like, holy moly, that number is the highest number I've ever seen. Or, it's way higher than I thought it was going to be. Or, I haven't been that weight since I was pregnant, or, whatever it is. They see a number and it's bigger than they thought it would be. It's kind of shocking for them. A lot of times this is like a very common story of it's at the doctor's office that we get this kind of shocking reading. This can also happen for women who maybe have a scale at home and maybe they haven't been feeling their best. Maybe they're noticing their clothes are fitting a little bit tighter and they're like, you know what, let me see kind of where I'm at. And they step on the scale, and that same experience, they're shocked to see that number being higher than they expected, right? So what do? They're like, all right, boom, that's what I needed to just motivate myself. And they jump into whether a fad diet, or they cut their calories, or they just focus on eating healthier, exercising more, whatever it is. That could be the thing that like gets them gung-ho into starting some sort of like fitness journey, health journey, weight loss journey. Well, they go down that kind of road. They start doing the things and they're like, all right, let me see if this is working. Maybe they go and start stepping on the scale every single day, and they were all in, did super well. They step on the scale the next day. That number's lower than it was. And they're like, yes, this is great. It's working. They're so happy. They're so proud of themselves. They continue to do the things. The next day, maybe it's kind of the same, or maybe it's down again. They're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. It's moving. They go on the next day. It's back up higher than it was when they started. What the heck is going on? They're probably really frustrated at this point of like, I've been, doing this for days now. I've been doing the same things, and I'm back up to where I started. Now, this is like a common scenario I see. It doesn't necessarily always have to look like this. For some women, it might be that they step on the scale that first time and it never went down, or it continues to go up. Or
it went up even instead of going down, right?
Yeah. And for some women, this looks like they're stepping on it daily, looking to see, is it going down? Is it going down? For some women, this is like they'll step on it once a week, or every couple of weeks to see what's happening. Regardless, this is a common kind of story and thread in a lot of women's journeys, is looking at the scale and using that to determine if what they're doing is successful or working or not. And this is the biggest mistake I think women make. Because again, The scale, it is a tool. It is a way to track our body weight. That is all it is. It does not tell us everything about what is going on. It does not paint the whole picture. It is one form of measurement. And if we're not using it effectively, we're not considering the different kind of limitations of the scale, then it can also become extremely discouraging and cause us to end up in that place where we're like, what the hell? This is pointless. This isn't working for me. I might as well just, give up on this and go back to doing the things that I was already doing and, might as well just live my life because this is pointless.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to a certain extent, obviously this is very important to kind of show people and to tell them and give them a little bit more clarity on. But you mentioned a couple of things, Ness, and I'll kind of put you on the spot, but you're like, we need to learn how to use the scale correctly because it is very much a data point. So I guess like for the listeners that are like, Vanessa, like I get it. And I don't want to just focus on a number on this scale. Like, where do you start? What do you do for something like this?
Yeah, well, with this episode, I want to kind of cover 4 points of how to effectively use the scale with this and how to really answer that question there. Okay. Because I do believe that for most people, it'll be beneficial for you to use the scale as a form of data. But how you use it might look differently depending on who you are, what you're currently doing, what you're trying to achieve, and just your relationship with the scale. So we have clients on kind of every end of the spectrum. We have clients who we never use the scale. We have clients who we use the scale daily. And we have clients who we use the scale kind of intermittently. We might use it during certain phases of their journey. We might not use it during other phases, or maybe use it during more often at like more of a frequent cadence at certain phases of their journey and less frequent at other phases. And I'm going to kind of explain why as I walk through these 4 points. You'll kind of understand what the thought process is around these. But the point I want to drive home is that all of those women, no matter how they're using the scale, whether they're using it none at all or they're using it a lot, they all can make progress ultimately towards their goals, which for most of them does involve weight loss. So the scale itself is not necessarily the determinant of success. It is just one way to kind of keep us essentially assessing if what we're doing is working or not, and is one of many, many ways. So when kind of considering, is it working? Is it actually an effective tool for you in your situation? The first point we need you to consider is that there are fluctuations. We have to be aware of fluctuations that happen with the scale. I think a lot of people understand this at this point in time, but there's still a lot of women who don't quite understand the extent that fluctuations happen on the scale. So your weight, the body weight that is actually being measured on the scale, this can change from, day-to-day water retention, from day-to-day like inflammation going up and down because your body is constantly kind of gaining and losing a little bit of inflammation. Changes in muscle mass on like a longer timeline can affect changes on the scale. There's a lot of factors. And so especially if we're using the scale daily, your day-to-day readings, it might not accurately reflect kind of what's actually happening with fat loss, which is ultimately what most people are looking for. When they say they want to lose weight, they actually mean they want to lose body fat. But if we're just looking at seeing that number going down, it could be going down for reasons that are beneficial. It could be going down for reasons that are not beneficial. If you are seeing the number going down, but you're losing more muscle mass than you are body fat, that is not a good thing. We do not want to lose muscle mass no matter what your goal is. Muscle mass is a determinant of long-term health, especially as we age. So regardless of how you want to look, we need to retain muscle. But if we are seeing, these up and down fluctuations and it's kind of like getting in your head, then that's where people start to feel like I'm frustrated, this isn't working, like I feel bad, and they're kind of letting the scale dictate how they feel day over day. That's when I see a lot of women that kind of like let what they do day to day be determined by how they feel about the number between their feet when they step on that scale in the morning. Now, if you are kind of finding that fluctuations are dictating your feelings about yourself, your feelings about what you are currently doing with your health and your fitness, and it's ultimately like impacting how you go about that day, then there's something I like to implement with clients. There's a lot of different methods that we can use here in our coaching, but something that I find to be really helpful for a lot of clients, and this is typically my first kind of like approach in this situation, is to do what I call a pre-scale warmup. So a pre-weigh-in warmup is another way to talk about this. And what this looks like is adding a lot of intentionality around what we do before we step on the scale. So for a lot of women, this might look like, you wake up, you kind of go to the bathroom, so you can kind of like eliminate that variable of, oh, I needed to pee more on this day versus not. Like, just go ahead and go to the bathroom. Make sure we're not wearing any clothes, so we kind of eliminate that variable. And they go ahead and they step on the scale. They're probably already like still kind of sleepy. They just go ahead, they see the number, and now suddenly it's like, oh, that number's down from yesterday. And they're like, oh man, I feel kind of happy and excited.
Day today is. Yeah.
And they feel great. Other days, they look at the number and it's up from yesterday, and they're like, what the heck? This is terrible. And they kind of like start to feel bad about themselves or bad about what they're doing, right? Well, if we can kind of create a pause between that point when, we're getting ready to step on the scale and when we actually step on the scale, and add in this warm up, I find this to be incredibly helpful. So what this actually looks like is, in that moment before you go to step on the scale, I want you to take a moment and assess how you are feeling physically and mentally. So on a physical level, you might take a moment. You might even especially if you're very much a data person, it can be helpful to actually track these things. So you might say, okay, let me see, scale of 1 to 10, how do I feel like my sleep quality was last night? Okay, let me note that down. Okay, scale of 1 to 10, how do I feel like my energy is this morning? Okay, let me note that down. How do I feel like my digestion is this morning? Some mornings you wake up and you kind of feel like heavy. You feel like there's some stuff like still sitting in your gut. Other mornings you're like, oh, I feel lean. I don't feel bloated. I feel kind of light in my digestion. Kind of note that down. Like, these are things that you can kind of start to track day to day. Just note them down, just pure data. On more of like a mental level, you can ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Like, you might want to pull up the feelings wheel. If you go to literally feelingswheel.com, is actually a wheel, if you haven't seen this before, that lists out a lot of in-depth emotions. So it can help you really clarify and label specifically what you're feeling in that moment. So maybe you pull that up because, let's be honest, we're a little bit sleepy in that moment. You might not be like thinking of a very broad vocabulary. So that might help you identify specifically what you're feeling in that moment. Then you might ask yourself, okay, well, what's on my mind this morning? How am I thinking about the upcoming day? Is my brain immediately starting to think about oh man, I have this big meeting today, or, oh my gosh, I have this upcoming, or am I thinking man, I'm really excited for this, or, I'm kind of feeling bleh about today. Just notice the thoughts that are coming up for you about the upcoming day. Notice thoughts that are coming up for you about the prior day. Is your brain kind of wandering towards something that happened the day before or the night before, and it's still kind of taking up some brain space? Just notice these kinds of things. We're building some awareness around what's on our mind. And then I think the most important one is to ask yourself, how do I feel about myself? And how do I feel about what I'm doing for myself? And just kind of what I've been doing in the recent days and even recent weeks for myself and my health. That is such an important question. And I really, really ask you to actually answer that for yourself. Now, if you do all of that and then you go and step on the scale, regardless of what that number looks like and regardless of whether or not that number affects you in that moment, now you can even ask yourself those same questions again after you get off the scale and after you've read what the number is, and notice, has any of that changed? Did I, before I stepped on the scale, was I thinking, man, I'm really happy with how I've been doing. I'm really excited about, how I've been consistent in the gym, and that's something I haven't really been consistent in for a long time. I'm really proud of how I navigated my bedtime routine last night. I've just been feeling leaner lately. I've been feeling stronger, feeling healthier, more energized. And then you go and step on the scale and it's up a couple pounds. Do you suddenly change and feel oh, maybe I don't feel as good about what I'm doing right now? It's okay if that actually is what's happening. The point is to notice and bring awareness to how we are letting the scale in that number impact how we are feeling and thinking about what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Funny. So, and just to give people, I think, perspective, right, on the number on the scale changing, when we go and plunge and get in the sauna, what happens, right? We can sweat out a pound or two just in 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. Then you get out of the sauna, you take a big gulp of water, and you regain some of that weight. So again, it's that number on the scale, although sure, it does help a little bit give you insight as to progress and making sure that we're on the right track. It doesn't tell it all. The other aspect of it too, and I actually just heard this on a podcast this morning, is managing expectations, right? The other, like you were saying, if you're in a phase of your cycle where you're super inflamed or you have a lot of stressors on your plate, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't expect to also see the number on the scale go down because maybe my body is holding on to a little bit more water because of my external factors. And I think that's where people get it wrong, where they have all of these things and they're like, my expectations are still in a very different world than they should be, because I don't take into account all the stressors and all the things I have going on. I mean, I know for me, sometimes we'll have a late meal on a Sunday night and the next morning I'm like 1.5 pounds up, but then by Wednesday I come right back down. So it's managing those expectations, but also being realistic with yourself, that your body fluctuates, your body changes, but most importantly, like you were saying, is kind of giving yourself a little bit of grace and be like, well, I have this, and that, so the scale is going to do this, and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point as well.
Thanks.
Because
I appreciate it.
I think a lot of women logically understand that, okay, especially women who maybe are dealing with hormone or gut issues, and they're aware of that, and they logically understand that I need to focus on my health first. I need to focus on my hormone imbalances, and I need to focus on my gut dysbiosis. I need to get those things cleared up, and then I can really focus on the weight loss side of things. And they logically understand that, like, working on their health may or may not cause their weight to go down during that time, but they know that, like, if they are seeing improvements and progress and they're doing the things to better their hormone health and their gut health, they understand that the weight loss will come. However, they still often find themselves in the moment when they're like, man, I've been doing this stuff and like I'm making progress in my hormone health, but like the weight has not gone down, and it kind of still feels disappointing. So it's just so good to bring awareness to this stuff, because especially if you're dealing with hormone imbalances, we know as women, our weight on the scale over the course of our cycle, over the course of your 28-day or so cycle, you are going to notice a fluctuation in weight probably between 3 to 5 pounds. That window can be even bigger for just bigger women. Like the more weight we carry overall, the more the fluctuation is going to be. So for a lot of women, it's like, let's say you start your kind of health journey at, the beginning of your cycle, and now you're seeing the weight going down because you're like, oh, I'm dropping some inflammation, some water weight. I'm like noticing some progress, and you're feeling good about that. And now let's say you get to the second half of your cycle, your luteal phase, and that's where now progesterone is going up. Now that higher level of progesterone causes more aldosterone, which is going to cause you to hold on to water. And so now the weight in the scale goes up. And maybe you just logically are not remembering, and even though you know those things, you just are not in the moment, like thinking about that. And you're suddenly like, oh my gosh, like here my weight is higher, and it's like peaking, higher than it was before I started this thing. And you kind of start to feel disappointed. Now, if we let that disappointment dictate the actions we take within our program, within what we're doing for ourselves, that can completely destroy your progress.
Yeah. And the other thing too that I want to point out too is, because I know you got very technical there for a second, you kind of lost me. I was like, aldosterone, testosterone, like I've never even heard of some of these testosterones. But my point being is, I think part of the maybe the uncertainty, or like the confusion, the frustration, it comes from lack of knowledge. So when you have somebody like you and you're like, hey, this is normal because your body's going to do this, and that, given that you're at this phase of your cycle, I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong, because they're like, well, part of my frustration is just fear. And that's where I'm like, well, if it's just fear, then get help so that you don't have to live in a world of fear, and you actually know what expectations should be correct, and get that third party perspective too.
Yeah. And, we're talking a lot about our hormone and gut issues and how that can impact the swings in the scale. I didn't really specify as well, but like gut issues, if you have a lot of gut issues, let's say you're prone to kind of constipation, or you have like swings between constipation and diarrhea, you're going to have big swings on the scale because of the fact that you probably have some days where you're a little bit backed up and you're holding more weight in your colon, and other days where you're not. And that alone is going to cause swings on the scale. But even outside of that, there's like so many factors in terms of our nutrition that's going to cause swings on the scale. You had mentioned of like, okay, if you eat dinner later, you're probably going to actually weigh in a little bit heavier that morning, just because your body hasn't had much time to break down and kind of like start to process that food through you. What you ate the day before, if it's a little bit higher in carbs come with holding a little bit more water, not in a bad way. That's just part of what happens. So it's just in general, like the way that you eat, your consistency with your nutrition, that's going to impact fluctuations too.
So then in addition to the scale, then like what else can people take a look at? What else can they use as data points to measure progress, to see if things are going correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think once you are bringing that awareness to the fact that there are fluctuations in the scale, you're like, okay, check. I understand that. Now, how else do I need to make sure I'm using the scale effectively? Well, like you said, I think we need to use multiple measurements for success, for progress. Now, in terms of kind of like combining the scale with other things. Kind of depends on the person's situation, what we want to bring in and use. For most of our clients, we use photos and circumference measurements. So we might use like a waist measurement, a hip measurement, a bust measurement. Maybe we do arms and thighs as well. We might use for some clients, and like I like to use this myself at different phases of my journey, but using kind of body fat testing. And now I'm not referring to like if your scale has kind of like a body fat percentage estimation, those are pretty inaccurate most of the time.
What about the ones that people hold? Those are pretty inaccurate too, aren't they?
Well, that's the in-body. So that's the one that like all typically do. And they all have their limitations. They're not like perfectly accurate. So it's using that again as another data point along with all the data points to be able to assess, okay, do we feel like we're moving in the right direction? Because you might have some data points that are pointing to, yes, we're moving in the right direction. You might have some data points that almost are implying that you're moving in the wrong direction. But if you look at the totality of the different forms of measurements, the different metrics that we're using, and you say, okay, as a whole, it looks like we're moving in the right direction, then that's helpful and that's successful. Not allowing any one metric, any one form of data to kind of like paint the whole picture for you, if you will. If you do a body fat testing, I recommend in-body or DEXA scans are kind of like the two best ones. For both of them, make sure that you do it at kind of like the same day of your cycle. So like if you're doing it, once a month or once every 3 months, like typically I would do it like a few times a year. Make sure that you are doing it the same time your cycle. Make sure you keep variables about the same to where you're doing it like about the same time of day, whether it's first thing in the morning is always best. Make sure that you are eating like kind of similar meals the day before, that you're exercising the same way or not exercising the same way. Whatever it is, we need to control those variables to get the most accurate data from those tests and be able to actually make them comparable to each other. We might want to bring in things like, so like we talked about progress photos. For some of our clients, we do that monthly. For some clients, we might do that weekly. It kind of depends on the situation. But most importantly, if you can actually look at it again, month over month, same time of the month in your cycle, that's important because as we know, certain points in the cycle, you're going to hold on to a little bit more water. And so it can be confusing if you're comparing, the day 1 of your cycle versus day 15 versus day 30 at different points in time. Similarly with photos, we want to keep as many variables controlled as possible. So if you can do it in like the same clothes at the kind of same time of day, so not doing like some photos in the morning, some photos in the evening, do it kind of same time of day, do it in the same clothing so that different clothing doesn't fit us differently. And if you can, do it in the same lighting and hopefully in good lighting. That way we can really see what your body's looking like. On that note too, if you're doing this on your own, be careful about not looking too closely at your photos and trying to analyze things when you don't have a trained eye of what to look for. I've had clients in the past where they'll like be looking at their photos and their side by sides and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like, this isn't looking like it's making progress or, this looks worse. And then as coaches, we might look at things and we're like, actually, I can see that, it looks like you've lost a little bit of lymphatic fluid here. And it looks like we're actually leaning out at this part of your body. And I'm seeing, this is actually looks like we're seeing a little more muscle definition. We have trained eyes where we know kind of what to look for because we have looked at a ton of progress photos over the years. So this is where it's also really helpful to have a coach. And if you find that you, again, kind of like the same thing of like you have a little bit of that unhealthy relationship with the scale, if you feel that way with photos too, and then I would encourage you, don't even look at your photos. Take your photos, send them to your coach or upload them, whatever that looks like. Do not look at them. Let your coach handle that. Let your coach look at them. Let your coach assess that data. Now, the next thing I kind of want to bring in here on my 4 points, we talked about understanding that there are fluctuations. We talked about using different metrics, not just using the scale. Well, kind of along the same lines here in terms of like using more metrics, I really, really, really encourage you, if your goal is weight loss, also focus on health and performance goals. This one is going to be vital to you long term when we're actually looking at that goal of like, when you want to lose weight, typically, what do you actually want? You want to feel more confident. You want to be able to like wear certain clothes.
Feel stronger.
Yeah, you want to just feel good and strong and you just want to like feel lean and healthy and energized, right? Well, those things can really also come from improving our performance. So having performance goals, whether that's like strength goals or performance goals in terms of, you might want to be able to run a 5K or run a half marathon or run a marathon. For, a lot of our clients, we work on strength goals. So it might be like, I want to get my first pull up, or I want to be able to squat my body weight, or I want to, be able to just do this movement, whatever that looks like. These can be really, really helpful for keeping our focus on things that are going to benefit us long term. Because if you are getting stronger, you are absolutely getting healthier and adding lean muscle mass. And like we talked about, lean muscle mass is so important to health and body composition. So that one is huge. Now, in terms of like improving those performance goals, we also, like I said, just focusing on health goals as a whole. So that could come in the form of maybe you get labs done and you want to see progress in your labs over time. Like that's what a lot of our clients focus on. Whether it's they came to us with labs they had already had done from their doctor, and over the course of time, we order them more labs, and they can see time over time, like, oh my gosh, my labs are improving time over time. That's huge. That's so encouraging. More like in between that, we might focus on biofeedback metrics, like how is our energy improving? How is our sleep improving? How is our mental health improving? We might look at things like, for some of our clients, they use Oura rings. That way we can like really objectively measure these things, looking at things like HRV and sleep scores. We had a client just the other day that was like messaging her coach so happy because she's like, oh my gosh, my HRV has gone way down my HRV has gone way up. My resting heart rate has gone way down. My sleep has improved. Like she's so happy about all these metrics.
What does HRV stand for again?
Heart rate variability. So we want that number to be higher as opposed to resting heart rate. You want it to be lower.
Got it. Okay.
I know it can be a little bit confusing. But really these forms of measurement, especially when you combine multiple and you're looking at all of them, typically you can always, even if one of them isn't like moving in the right direction yet, there's something that's progressing. And if you focus on that, that will keep you feeling motivated and encouraged, which makes it a lot easier to do the things that are working for you day in and day out. And my last kind of point here is to consider body composition. So again, when we're talking about losing weight, seeing the weight on the scale go down, typically what you want is to actually look leaner. Well, what if I told you that you could actually keep your weight the same, or maybe even see your weight go up and actually get leaner, actually look leaner, get leaner, feel leaner? Would you accept that? Would you want that? Most people,
Hell
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that is the reality. I see that with a lot of clients, at least early in their journey. That can be the case for a lot of clients, because the reality is, let's say your weight stays the same, but now we're looking at, the way clothes are fitting. We're looking at measurements. We're looking at progress photos, and we can see that your body is visibly getting leaner. What's happening? We're trading muscle for body fat. You're adding lean muscle and you're losing body fat. That's typically what that looks like. Your weight stays the same. It's kind of a wash. On the flip side, we might see your weight go up and you still get leaner. What's happening? We're adding muscle and we're not necessarily losing body fat yet. What that means is your body fat percentage is going down, because that means your ratio of body fat to lean muscle mass on your body, you are getting a lower body fat percentage, even though the scale is going up. You will look and feel better.
And I think, again, to me, I think that's where the uncertainty, the unknown causes a lot of frustration and fear, because people are like, yeah, like I would love that, but how do I know if that's what's going to happen? Or how do I know if I'm actually putting on muscle? How do I know if I'm toning up? And I think, again, to my point, that's where a third party can very much come in and be like, all right, this is the plan and we're going to follow this plan because I know this plan works and I've done it with like 1,000 people. So let's stick with it. Let's kind of keep going from there. And I think part of me is that's where it takes a lot of that frustration away.
Yeah. Well, because you can logically understand and know everything I said in this podcast, and yet you still...
Well, you're still a human being. You have emotions.
Exactly. You still might find that you're like, I don't know if this is working for me. I'm just kind of starting to freak out. Maybe the scale's going up or the scale's staying the same, and I don't know if what I'm doing is right. And you get in your head about it. Even coaches do that. This is why coaches have coaches too. Coaches know that trying to do your own, programming, never a good idea, because we can logically know everything. We can be the smartest coach in the world, and yet emotions still come into play, which are going to dictate your actions and cause you to make changes when you probably shouldn't be making changes. This is why it's so important. I truly believe that everybody in the world should work with a coach at least at some point in their life. But I also know that it's not necessarily a something that is possible for everybody to do. And that's why we put out this kind of free content to hopefully help you utilize the scale effectively in your own journey and help you make the progress you want to see, to where that weight will go down over time because you're doing the things that are going to cause that to happen. So I hope this episode was helpful. I hope you had some breakthroughs with this so that you can really continue on your health journey, your weight loss journey, and really achieve what you want to achieve. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, everybody.